Hello everybody, and welcome to the webinar Engaging Researchers with Data Management, the Cookbook. We'll be starting the webinar pretty much very soon. We're just getting a couple more people joining us. Okay, I think that's it for now. Welcome again to the webinar Engaging Researchers with Data Management, the Cookbook, with our speakers James Savage, Connie Clare, and Raman Ganguly. My name is Stephanie Ketas. I work for the Australian Research Data Commons and I'm the RDA Director of Operations. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. The webinar is being recorded and we plan to make the slides and recording available a couple of days after the meeting. You've joined this webinar in listen-only mode, which means all of you are muted, but please feel free to type questions into the questions panel during the talks or afterwards, and we'll do our best to address them. Okay, let me turn over to our first speaker. And our first speaker is James Savage. Just give me one sec. James, I'm just making you presenter. Okay.
Thank you very much, Stephanie.
James is a postdoctoral fellow at University College Cork and was previously a data champion while a postdoc at the University of Cambridge. But James is also currently in New Zealand and I think is planning to come to the RDA plenary next month. So if you can't talk to him here, you can talk to him there, I think. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks for organising the webinar. It's a really good opportunity to talk about this output. So I'm going to be the sort of framing person talking about this output, Engaging Researchers with Data Management, the Cookbook, which is a textbook that we published last year as an output of the Libraries for Research Data interest group. And I'm going to be talking about the sort of overarching story about how the project occurred and came about and how we sort of managed it all the way through. And then I'm going to hand over to Raman Ganguly and Connie Clare, who are going to talk about specific parts of the project they were more involved with in more detail. And I think those are the more interesting parts of the project, so look forward to that. It's really great to see so many people attending. And you know what, I'm going to turn my webcam on very briefly so you can see who I am. Hello, this is me. I'm in New Zealand. It's sunny at the moment, which is nice. And I look forward to attending the RDA plenary next month in Melbourne. And if, as Stephanie says, if there's anything you guys want to talk to me about this or about anything else that I do, feel free to talk to me then. Right, so that's not so distracting. I'm going to turn my webcam back off and let's start. So the way we're going to work this through the webinar, I'm going to talk a little bit in the introduction about the overall project and generally give an overview of how it happened. And then I'm going to pass over to Raman to talk about the data collection and processing that we did during the project. And then I'm going to pass over to Connie to talk about the case studies and the book sprint. Exactly what these are will become clearer close to the time. And then I'll take the speaking back again at the end to talk about how we published the book and to give some final thoughts about where we're going next with these kind of projects. Right, so, and then of course, we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. So the actual output, we called Engaging Researchers with Data Management, the Cookbook, and it was published through Open Book Publishers in late September, early October last year, depending on exactly how you count it. And the output, the core of the output is 24 case studies that describe international strategies of how to engage researchers with effective research data management. So it's 24 different ways that different institutions around the world have implemented some kind of strategy to try and get the people generating and managing the research data interested in managing research data effectively. And as you can see, the book has a number of authors, including Connie, who we'll talk later. And I'm not sure why we picked that cover image, but it does sort of give a sort of nice impression of lots of people coming together, I think, which is a good analogy for the project as a whole. Now, this output came out of a project, as I said, out from the Libraries for Research Data interest group. And what I think is interesting and perhaps useful for other people thinking about implementing these same kinds of projects and trying to get this same kind of output published is the timeline that we worked under. And it all happened really relatively quickly, and to my mind, relatively painlessly as well. So it really was a very good experience to be involved with it. Now, we started off in November 2019 at the RDA Plenary 12 during International Data Week in Botswana. And that was when we got everyone together and the project started taking shape. We decided we were going to try and do this thing. We then had a survey to try and collect examples of institutional strategies for research data management. And the survey template we put together right at the end of 2019. We then had January, February, and March of 2019 was dedicated to our getting the survey out there and collecting data through the survey. There was then an update at RDA Plenary 13 in Philadelphia. We then spent the next 3 months looking through the data that we had and selecting case studies and doing interviews with the people involved with those institutional strategies to collect as much contextual information on each of them as possible. And then once we had all those case studies written up in the sense of the notes from the interviews, we organized a book sprint in July 2019 to write up all those notes from the case studies into a full draft of the book as a whole. And Connie will talk more about that part of the process later. Following the book sprint, we then had a couple of months for final editing and publication. And then the project was presented and disseminated in the final cookbook available at the RDA plenary in Helsinki. So the whole process really only took a single year, which I think is actually kept everyone engaged in a sense, because we saw continuous progress all the way through. And really it's a testament to the organizers of the project, particularly Marta Teperek, who was the initial driver, that everything got done in an excellent time frame. So just to give a little bit more detail about the stages of the project. So the project, before it was published, was called Engaging Researchers with Research Data, What Works? As I said already, it was kind of implemented and led by Marta Teperek, who is currently a data stewardship coordinator at TU Delft. And the aim of it from the start was to find innovative ways of engaging researchers with research data, and crucially to make this information accessible to others. We wanted to have a textbook output and a website output, both of them as free and easy to access as possible. And we wanted to base this on analysis of survey data and detailed case studies of existing strategies. To get the project going, we realized we needed a diverse team from across the world, ideally including lots of people involved with some of these kind of research data management engagement strategies already. And we settled on, after lots of talking at the initial RDA plenary and collection of people through mailing lists and discussions and networking. We had a steering board of 10 who made the overall decisions for how the project was working and where it was going. We then had 6 task leaders who were organizing specific parts of the project, the data collection or the book sprinting, things like that. And then we had the 8 authors who contributed to writing and editing and publishing the final book. I just bolded the ones of us involved in this webinar for the sake of ease of reference here. But in total, we had almost 50 project members, if you like, depending on exactly how you count them, people who invested their own time and effort contributing to case studies, getting the word out there about the survey, contributing comments on the drafts, generally giving their opinions on how best to get the most out of this project that we were doing, and their contributions were invaluable. And I think it's really the strength of having this diverse and large group that we managed to keep well organized and on track that resulted in us getting the output out as efficiently as we did. And as I mentioned, this was really an output built out of the Libraries for Research Data Interest Group, although including many people who were not prior members of the Research Data Interest Group, or even the RDA as a whole. And I've just done a nice little slide there showing the diversity of people, even just involved in our steering board. Biased towards Europe for sure, but we had a fair number of people from the project as a whole across several different continents to give a sort of worldwide perspective where possible. This is a good point to talk about my background, which I've left over so far just because it's contextually it fits better here. So I'm a behavioral ecologist, not a traditional data person, and I'm a researcher, not someone who's a professional data manager or data steward or anything like that. I work in the area of sort of reproductive behavior, social behavior, intergenerational effects, and I'm as often moving around quite a lot in my postdoc phase between University College Cork, where I am now, the University of Sheffield, and the University of Cambridge. And the latter is the most important for the context of this, because while at Cambridge, I was involved heavily with the open science side of things, and specifically with the Data Champions program. Now, Connie's going to talk more about Data Champions later, but in short, they're a volunteer organization within the university designed so that the central research support staff can have people to talk to and who can provide support within individual research units. And these people can both feed back to the central unit about what's happening in their discipline and provide support and advice within their local research communities. And as part of being a data champion at Cambridge, I was sent to International Data Week in Botswana, which was also the RDA plenary, of course, and gave a talk about the data champions, representing the program there. And my session I was part of was organized by Marta, part of this Motivations and Recognition for Good Data Stewardship session. And it was through there I got in contact with her. And the stories of lots of other people involved with the project are similar. Not all of us had prior connections to the RDA. Marta and the other members of the steering board and wider community were very good about engaging with potentially interested people as widely as possible and getting them engaged with and contributing to this project. So with the team assembled and organized and as deciding to collect data as much as possible on these strategies for institutional data management, I think it's time for me to hand over to Raman, who is going to talk to you in much more detail about how the survey was put together and the data that we collected through it. So Stephanie, are you going to take this back off me and then hand it over to Raman? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I will do that. So thanks,
Fantastic.
James. I'll just make Raman the presenter. While I'm doing that, are there any questions for James at this point? If so, please type them into the questions panel. And let me just briefly introduce Raman. Raman Ganguly is the head of software design and development at the Central Computer Center of the University of Vienna in Austria. Since 2011, he's been in charge of the data management infrastructure of the university with the focus of data from research and education. He's also responsible for the development of the open source repository, and I'm probably going to pronounce that wrong, Phaedra, which is used by 20 organizations in 5 countries. Okay, Raman, I think your slides are there. Go for it.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, James, for the introduction. Hello, everybody. So I'd like to add some points to my introduction, because I'm not a researcher and also was not that hardly involved in the data analysis. But as Stephanie already said, that I'm responsible for infrastructure for data management. So this was also one of my main roles, to provide infrastructure to store the data, and I go then more into the detail a little bit later. I was also at the RDA plenary in Botswana, and we discussed there the project and how we want to go with the project. And I thought back then it's a very rough timeline, and I wasn't sure that we can manage this, but Marta did really a good job to orchestrate the whole project and drive it through, and it was really nice and to see with a lot of people they'd done a lot of work voluntary in this project, and we really had a good time during the whole project. So as James already said that we started with a survey. So first of all, we had, of course, to set up the survey just to find the questions. So we had two main sections for the question as well. So this first was about the institution, what's the institution about, and also to get a little bit of idea of the size of the institution and also where this institution is located. So all this data then goes into the analysis of back then, and also to see it more in the use cases also for the people that can orientate with their own institution where they can fit into this. And then the main section, this was about really to have the questions how to engage with your research community, of course focused on data management. So, and we were completely open with this, so we wanted to really get informations about the institutions, how they do this, and we know that there's a lot of different ways the people approach to this topic, and we want to get known about how they do this, in which ways, which work, which doesn't work, and so on and so on. So the survey was online in March, and we did then a presentation also at the RDA plenary in Philadelphia. There we also made some advertising that people can also join the survey, because back then the survey was still online, and I don't know exactly how if then we had more people rush in after the plenary, but overall we had a good outreach. Also, we had 60 funders and 80 research institutions, and we could manage to run over 28 different mailing lists. So also we could promote the whole survey, and it was also a good feedback from the survey. So going to the raw data, what we get, we had 260 responses, so that was quite a lot. And from these 260 responses, we have 50 unique scientific institutions. So we have also seen there are some from some of our institutions we got more than one feedback. And in the whole survey, from the whole data, what we have seen, there were 88 described activities. So there was quite a lot of data, and that was really challenging to go through the whole data, and also to make the analysis and how we break it through, because the response were very diverse. Also, the approaches were very diverse. So we used the GitHub repository. This was an on-premise repository at the University of Vienna, and we put all the data in there, and the people who did the data analysis was able to work with the GitHub, and did run also every result then back to the GitHub. So we could also have a lot of track and what's happening during the whole process, and this was very helpful. Also that we had so many people who are volunteer worked in this, and with this big group, this works quite well. We did two ways of looking into the data. there was a quantitative data analysis, and then also because we wanted to get out the use cases and describe the use cases more precise, so that we need to prepare the case studies and see what we can get out of the data and how many case studies we have inside of the data. We also need to make some categorizations. This was a big discussion during the process because of the diversity of the data, and also how we can have a nice overview over all this, and to make it also very easy in the end for the people to see, to get also a kind of way that they see how they can fit your institution in all these case studies we selected. So also they can see, okay, we are a middle-sized university, for example, and then we look at the people who have also for the case studies, who also came from a middle-sized university, and also from the budgeter, and we had also a nice overview in the book. I think Connie will show a little bit of this then afterwards. From the data, we needed also some more information, and so before we started with the book sprint, there was also some interviews running with the people who did the case study, who wrote the case study. So we came back to the people again, and they run some interviews to get additional data, and this was the base for the book sprint, and that's more or less from my side. And I like to add, I will be also at the plenary in Melbourne, so if anybody want to get more information about the data and the raw data and how we get there, you can catch me up also in Melbourne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahman. If anyone in the audience has any questions, please type them into the question panel, and we'll read them out to the speakers. But if you don't have questions now, by all means, you can put those in later, and we'll get back to them at the end. Okay, I'll go back to James to continue with his presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie. This will be a short little section for me before I hand over to Connie. As Rahman was saying, once we had the data in place and the surveys all done, we needed to select the case studies from all that survey data that we had. And just to recap what Rahman said and what I said earlier, we had more than 40 project members worldwide and collected the case studies. And as Rahman said, we contacted 60 funders, 80 scientific institutions. We used 28 mailing lists to get the word out about the survey, and received lots of responses, including 50 unique scientific institutions across the world. And from that, we needed to decide which of those examples that we'd had submitted to the survey were the best case studies to develop for writing the cookbook. Because of course, the aim of the cookbook is to provide a mixture of different strategies, both in the sense of strategies implemented for different reasons, but also strategies implemented by different types of institutions at different points of development on the research data management sort of timeline, if you like, from ones where there was really no data management support at all at the institution to ones that already had a very robust system for supporting their researchers in data management, but wanted to develop or increase engagement in particular ways. So it was a long, difficult process, and the first thing that we did was to split out all the examples for which we decided we had enough data that we could potentially write a case study about them. We first, cut down the numbers to those. And then 3 of the people on the steering board each selected the case studies that they themselves thought were the most relevant and interesting ones. And in the end, we came out with 24 case studies. So once the 3 people who had assessed the case studies individually, we submitted our selections back to the steering board, and then the steering board went through and looked for the ones that were agreed upon by all 3 of the reviewers as being good examples to include in the cookbook. And for the most part, there was a large degree of overlap. I think something like 15 or 16 case studies appeared on everyone's list. So then it was just a question of filling out the rest. We decided that somewhere between 20 and 25 was a reasonable amount for a cookbook to sort of show off the diversity of responses that we had without making the whole project too unwieldy or writing up studies that were more or less duplicates or similar enough that we really only needed one. An important thing to point out here actually is that not all of those case studies were actually from the survey data. Because all of us were involved in one way or another with these kinds of research data management strategies already. We also pursued examples that had not been submitted to the survey when we thought they were particularly good examples. And in the end, I believe we looked at including a further 7 from examples that we knew about, but not all of those made it into the final cookbook due to issues with getting access to the people involved directly, which we wanted to do. And as Raman said, once we had those case studies selected and we'd made sure that there were contact people available to develop the survey examples that we had into full case studies for inclusion in the cookbook, we contacted the key staff involved with those strategies and pursued interviews with them to collect enough contextual data to write up the case studies properly. We wanted to be sure that we were getting the full story about all of these strategies rather than just relying on the information that we had from the survey data. So where possible, we talked to more than one person from each institution. Right, and I think with that, I can hand over to Connie, who is going to tell you about her experiences being directly involved with doing the interviews for the case studies, and also her experiences being involved physically with the book sprint. I was also involved with the book sprint, but I was editing remotely overnight because I was also in New Zealand when the book sprint was happening. So Stephanie, can you take it back off me and hand it over to Connie, please?
I shall do that. And while I do that, can I just read out a question that's just come in? So that's a question potentially to both Raman and James. So the question is from someone who'd be interested to hear more about the methodology, survey questions, interview questions, etc. So Raman mentioned the GitHub repository. Will there be any materials about the process for the study made available in addition to the final cookbook?
So not directly. We also, James said in the beginning that we also plan to have a website to also present a little bit more of the data. But we wanted then afterwards to focus more on the cookbook itself, because we thought that would be more relevant to a broader audience than just to have it on the website. Because it's also going to the engaging researchers relate on high-level decisions. So, and it's easier when you have a book or something in a nice visual way to go to high-level people and tell them, than rather to have it on the website with all the data and so on. What we are thinking about is to do a website now or a little bit later, because we are also having a BOF, at the second BOF at the RDA in Melbourne that we like to make also an interest group for this topic. And if we go to an interest group, then we will go more to have it the website and also can see which kind of data we can show and so on and so on.
Just to add to what Raman said just then, yeah, the plan is still to have that data available online on a website at some point, I believe. It's just the team was focusing on making sure the cookbook was out before the previous plenary. And I think now that we're, as Raman says, trying to develop into an interest group, one of the items on the agenda is finishing off or getting a website set up and turning this into a longer term thing with follow-ups to the cookbook.
Okay, thank you very much, James and Raman. Let's hand over to Connie. Connie Clare is a PhD student in developmental biology at the University of Nottingham. And last year, she undertook a 3-month professional internship at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, where she enjoyed working with the data champions. And during her internship, Connie also took the opportunity to participate in the book sprint, which was the collaborative writing exercise that led to the first draft of the cookbook. Okay, over to you, Connie.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, Stephanie. So I'm just going to pop my webcam on now. I think I can just say hello to everybody, and just to prove that this ungodly hour in the UK, I've actually gotten dressed and I'm not in my pajamas. So that's just to say hello. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to the Research Data Alliance and also the webinar organisers for the chance to speak today. And following on from the great talks from James and Raman, I'd just like to really share with you some of my own personal experience of what it was like to take part in this RDA project. So as an author, an editor and an illustrator of the book, but primarily as a PhD researcher who is facing the daily challenges of trying to achieve good research data management. So I thought I'd just share a little bit of background about myself. So as Stephanie mentioned, I'm a final year PhD student. I'm studying developmental biology. And as you can see this quite nice flattering picture of cows on the screen here, you'll be pleased to know this isn't random. I do actually work with cattle embryos and I use them as a biological model for human development. So as you'll already know, so last year in June, as part of my doctoral studies, I embarked on a journey to the Netherlands to undertake a 3-month internship at Delft University of Technology. I was working in the library with the head of research data services, Alistair Dunning, and he was also a sponsor of this RDA project. And I worked with data stewardship coordinator, Marta Teperek. And as you know, Marta was also the project leader of this cookbook. And as it's already mentioned a couple of times today, during my internship, most of my time was spent getting to know these people here. This is the Data Champions Wall of Fame at TU Delft. And most of my time was actually spent writing articles to raise awareness of the fantastic work they do and to reward and recognise their efforts and achievements. And I'll explain a little bit more about the Data Champions when I talk about the particular case studies that I was responsible for writing. So as I'm a keen writer, you might imagine that when Marta actually invited me to participate in the development of the cookbook, when I started my internship in June, I absolutely jumped at the chance. So I really knew that this would be an exciting adventure and it was going to be my first experience of a book sprint. And in fact, I didn't even know what a book sprint was when Marta asked me to take part. And of course, I'll go into a bit more detail about the book sprint at the end of my talk. So I thought I'd start by sharing some information about some of the case studies that became a part of the cookbook. So I'm going to focus only on 3 of the case studies that I had the pleasure of writing, and these are all about the creation of networks of data champions. So the chapter, it's chapter 5 of the book. I won't go into a huge amount of detail on these individual cases, but I really just want to highlight some of the points to demonstrate that what this cookbook as a resource can actually offer an institution. So I thought it'd be a good idea to share an overview of the case study I know best, so about the data champions. The chapter starts by really asking the question, why would you even want to build a community of data champions? So I'm sure you're aware that in the modern day research institution, we have a diverse nature of subjects and disciplines, which means that we can't really approach research data management as a one-size-fits-all. We know that researchers often struggle, they face challenges because they don't possess the relevant skills or expertise. Perhaps they don't know the available resources that are available to help them, so they don't know where to store or how to share data. Maybe they don't have sufficient time to allocate to research data management practice. Maybe they just don't really see the benefits, or they don't see the value of data management because it's not sufficiently incentivized by the current academic reward system. And from speaking to the contributors of the case studies, it became clear that data champions, so James mentioned a little bit about them earlier, as researchers or individuals who are embedded within the research community, they can actually help to support the diversity of disciplines. And in turn, this can relieve the workload from central support units, and the data champions can do this by providing more targeted training, whether that be through workshops or on a one-to-one basis. And this generally helps to raise awareness of good research data management practice across a wider research community. And because they're embedded within the community, and many of them are researchers themselves, they understand the needs and they empathise with researchers. And this helps through facilitating peer-to-peer learning to drive a culture change towards better research data management. So just to give you an example of the 3 case studies, so these are the individual institutions that contributed their success stories and lessons learned. So of course, you've already heard from James Savage when he was a data champion at the University of Cambridge. I spoke to James, I interviewed James and his former colleagues, Lauren and Sasha, about the implementation and sustainability of the Data Champions programme, which was started at the University of Cambridge in September 2016. I also spoke to Yasmin, who was the Data Champions Community Manager at Delft, about them kickstarting their programme, which was launched in September 2018. And then I also heard from 2 members of the Wageningen University and Research Data Competency Centre, so Eric and Saskia, about their plans to launch their own programme of data stewards, which was their kind of version of a Data Champions programme. And of course, you can go to chapter 5 and you can read through these case studies, and you'll see that there are numerous similarities across each of them, but there are slight subtle differences of how each of these community programmes are run. So if you're interested in starting a community-based model, then I urge you to go and just have a look at those. And you can also just see here the infographics. It's probably quite small to read, but this helps you to navigate through the case studies and just select, by number of researchers, number of full-time employees, the cost of which programme might be more applicable to your institution. And of course, without any further ado, I'd just like to share our own dictionary definition of a data champion at TU Delft. I feel that there is a general consensus among each of these case studies that the data champions are individuals who more often than not will volunteer their discipline-specific expertise, they promote fair data principles, and they advocate for proper research data management. From my own experience of getting to know the data champions at Delft, I know that they are individuals who really share a passion for knowledge exchange, and they want to foster and build a collaborative and researcher-led community to drive the uptake of good research data management within their faculties and departments. So that gives you a little bit of context about some of the kinds of flavours and case studies that we have included in the book. So once I'd interviewed the contributors, taken notes, written the transcripts up, of course, the next step was to join forces with the multidisciplinary book sprint team on the 10th of July last year. So 7 of us checked into a hotel in Den Haag or The Hague, and we drafted the book in just 3 days. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the concept, I know James has described it a little bit earlier. But the book sprint is an exercise of writing a book collaboratively in a short period of time, so typically in less than a week. And for me, looking back on the book sprint, I liken it to one of those experiences that if you knew what lay ahead of you, you would be quite daunted. But then reflecting back on the process in retrospect, from start to finish, it was just such a memorable and truly rewarding experience for everybody. So here you can see on the photo the book sprint team. So from left to right, we have Maria, myself, Joanne, Isa, Marta and Ellie, and then Jan is at the front taking the photo. And of course, you'll notice that James, our editor, is missing from the picture. And as he mentioned earlier, it's because James was actually editing the book remotely. So he was actually traveling around at the time or moving back from New Zealand. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge how useful it was during the book sprint to have James operating in a different time zone to us. So because he was in New Zealand time, we'd write the document by day and he would then edit it by night. So it was a really productive way of working because it meant that we could return fresh-faced the following morning to address his comments and suggestions and revise our written sections. So it worked really well. And obviously we've all got beaming smiles on this photo, so it makes it look like we didn't actually get anything done. But I just want to show it was actually a very industrious process, and here's the photographic evidence to prove it. So I think the rest of the team would agree with me in saying that actually writing solidly for 3 days is really hard work. And one of the main challenges that I had to overcome personally was the fear of writing collaboratively and transparently using Google Docs. So I was quite afraid at first for everyone to be able to see and read what I was writing. But then I found that in the end it became really helpful because you're working with like-minded individuals who are sharing the same goals and motivations to complete the same task in hand. So it meant that we could all reflect and read one another's work, and that was really essential to our success. And on that note, I just want to share a few of the things that really did help us to write this book together in a secluded location. So here are a few top tips or words of advice for anybody who's considering a book sprint. So I'd say you're starting the sprint, and I think it's really important to have clear aims, objectives, and an overarching vision. So know what you want. So our book sprint facilitators, Marta and Maria, communicated the aims really well, so we knew what lay ahead of us each day. And then, of course, because you have limited time together and there's a lot of work to be done, it's important to stick to schedule and have daily checkpoints where you can reconvene as a group and discuss progress. And at this point, it's important to be able to adjust the daily or even hourly goals and then adapt the actions to meet the deadlines under strict time constraints. And I would just say it's important as well to free your creative mind. So take a break and recharge. You can't write solidly, really. So this might mean going for a walk in the fresh air, taking a break in the hotel room, pouring another coffee, or in our case, it was self-indulging in multiple chocolate bars or pastries, for instance. And make use of the fact that you're working as a group, so communicate with one another. So I'll just go back to this picture here. So you can see that we have coloured post-it notes. So the green post-it note on the laptop means vacant, open for conversation, you can bother me. The red post-it note on the laptop meant otherwise engaged, busy working, I'm in the zone, so don't bother me. So I think that's quite useful. And finally, work hard, play hard. And I think this picture here just shows that we did have a lot of fun during the book sprint. Most of us, I must admit, must have felt pretty jaded by the end, but there was a lot of laughter, and I know that through this RDA project, I've made friends and memories for life, and that I'm really grateful for. And if anybody is actually interested in knowing a little bit more about our experiences personally, there is an article that I've written that was published to the RDA blog, Book Sprint Success, a team writing exercise for the win. So it talks a little bit about why we advocate for collaborative writing, and why we think it's a good idea. And on that note, I'll end this talk now. I'm unfortunately not going to be at the RDA plenary in Melbourne next month because I have a PhD to finish. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask, and hopefully I'll see you at a plenary in the future. So thank you for that. And
Thanks
now,
very much, Connie.
yeah, sorry, I was going to say I'll hand over to James or Stephanie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll just pass over to James again. Again, if there are any questions, please feel free to type them into the questions box, either now or towards the end. I don't see any questions at this point. So James, would you like to continue?
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks, Connie, for the talk. It's good to hear more details of your experiences through that whole process. And I agree, it worked really well for me as well, being on a different time zone, seeing all this material appear and having to work through it all without other people. Editing while everyone else was asleep was obviously very useful because it wasn't changing as I was editing it. And then everyone got back the next day to a improved, hopefully, version of the text. It did work remarkably well. So the next step was to go from the point we were at the end of the book sprint to actually getting the book published. And this ended up being actually a sort of far easier and simpler process than we initially thought. I think all of us had some trepidation about how best to turn that selection of case studies that we had into outputs. Yeah, just to give a quick overview here. So we had all the drafts of all the case studies finished. We hadn't, it was all in a format that was all nice and readable. We had all the content in there as text. But the question was how to turn this from this selection of written case studies that everyone had put together, all written by different people, into a finished output, ideally one as cohesive as possible. And just for some visual interest here, this is a summary of the target audiences and main drivers, ease of implementations for all the case studies that we had in the book, divided up, as Roman said, into chapters that broadly organized them into sections, like the community-based support mechanisms like the data champions. That was one chapter. So the first thing we wanted to do was to open up all the text that we had into a public consultation. And so the first thing we did after the book sprint ended on the 12th was to go through all the text that we had, draft up and finalize introductions and the other sort of minor bits between sections and at the start and end of the books and things like that, to try and have a complete book in a state that could be opened up to public consultation. And we did that in the 10 days immediately following the end of the book sprint. And then on the 22nd of July, we opened it up to public consultation via Google Docs. And this was just the same document that we'd been collaboratively working on during the book sprint. And at that point, it was open. We distributed it out to the usual mailing lists and RDA groups and everything like that to see if we could get as much input from the wider research community, not only all the people already involved with our project, which is of course almost 50 people, but everyone else in the wider community. And we got fantastic engagement. We got lots of comments from people, dozens of people giving just single little comments here and there about particular sections, people who had been involved with the interviews or also had been involved with the particular case studies that we were describing, coming through and clarifying particular points or offering alternative opinions or further contextual information about certain parts of each case study. And some people who went through and really gave very detailed comments throughout on areas that needed better readability or where something wasn't quite gelling between the different case studies in terms of style or things like that. It was all very useful and saved us a lot of editorial work and added greatly to the quality of the final book. This is effectively a form of community peer review, and we did indeed take many of the suggestions of the public consultation on board. And at that point, once the public consultation was in progress and we had a full draft of something resembling a book in place, and we were fairly happy with the quality of it, the question was whether we could find a publisher. And of course, this is early August 2019, and ideally we wanted to be able to publish the output before the RDA plenary in October. So we had a very short time scale to work with. We really needed this to be a fast publication. We also wanted it to be open access, because one of the original aims of the project was to make it as freely available and easy to access to everyone as possible. So we really needed it to be somewhere where people could really download it at zero cost. Ideally, we needed the publication process to be relatively inexpensive, because very few of us had any ability to fund publication through dedicated grants or anything like that, which as many of you I'm sure are aware, mostly fund research work directly funded by particular funding bodies. Finding funding to fund this kind of output is relatively challenging, so we wanted to keep our budgets as low as possible. But we also wanted it to be quality controlled. We didn't want to just run to a cheap vanity press and have it published out there, because there's some value in ensuring that you're using a publisher which has a good reputation, because it increases the likelihood that your output will be recognized and as worthwhile to at least take a skim through. But in the end, we managed to find a solution to this problem. And in August 2019, we contacted Open Book Publishers, which is a publishing group house out of Cambridge, UK. And they have a peer review for all the publications that they do. And because of the way we were doing our community peer review, their peer review could happen alongside our community peer review process. And in the end, the peer reviewers that we had through them, I think gave fewer comments than some of the community peer reviewers, and we're completely happy with the quality of the work as presented, having already gone through some community peer review when they saw it. Open Book Publishers is a fully open access publisher, but it did require some funding to be sourced, and in the end we managed to figure out that we could fund the publication of the book through small amounts of funding sourced from several institutions, organizations that the members of the steering board and authors were directly involved with. And there's a full list of those in the book. But this was amounts in the order of 500 euros or thereabouts from lots of the contributors, to an amount whether we negotiated with Open Book Publishers for the publication of the book as a whole. And they were fantastic throughout the whole process. And when they'd heard that we needed the publication expediting and ideally getting everything through by the time of the plenary, they told us exactly how the timeline worked. They included our book in a series of open field guides they were putting together, to give it some kind of context within their publishing system as well. And were just generally fantastic. I really don't have a bad word to say about them. And I would encourage other people looking for opportunities to publish open access to consider them very strongly as an option. As it is now, the book is freely available on their website through that link that I posted in the slides earlier. And you can also order a hard copy at cost from them. They print it on demand. And by using them, we had the book all in place by the end of September 2019, in time to have hard copies available for the RDA plenary. And that's really the end of that process. So I just wanted to talk briefly about where we're going from here, taking off from this cookbook that we've produced. And this is going to stick very closely to what was discussed in the Bird of Feather session at the previous RDA plenary. We've put forward a draft charter for a researcher engagement interest group. It was clear by the end of the project that what we were doing was really outside of the umbrella of the Libraries for Research Data interest group, and we had enough engagement and involvement with a diverse group of people for the project that we thought that spinning it out into a separate interest group that could build on this existing work was the right way to go. This was really triggered by the overwhelming response to the survey and the community feedback and the public engagement with the output. And we want to go beyond these institutional practices moving forward, with the aim of course, building on our initial output here and developing this into a more ongoing thing. The interest groups can provide a forum for exchanging information on these new approaches to RDM. Ideally, we want to produce a sequel to this output. And we also want to follow up with all these case study contributors, because I think a really valuable thing to do would be to provide a second follow-on section for as many of these case studies as possible that explores whether they were continued in future years, and whether they've been built on or developed by the institutions that implemented, whether they've now unfortunately just been discontinued, and include this information in a revised version of the cookbook. And as we mentioned earlier, we really want to develop a website to further promote the studies and also to share some of the broader survey data in a way that makes sense. And the outputs we want to get out of this is more cookbooks, website methodologies, and we need to really want to increase our international representation across even more continents and countries, and use more channels for outreach to increase the range of our surveys and data collection for follow-on work. And I think that will do for a summary, and we should have a few minutes for questions and comments and discussion, I think. Stephanie?
Thanks very much, James. Again, please type in questions if you have any. I have one which may be a little bit difficult to answer in a couple of minutes, but would you be able to give a couple of key outcomes from the actual, results from the actual cookbook? So some of the things that have worked in engaging researchers.
Well, it's a difficult question to answer, because of course the primary output of the cookbook is just having the information about the case studies all out there. Mm-hmm. I would say that, and a secondary point to that is that I think one of the real challenges of a lot of these programs, none of which have been running for particularly long periods of time, is that showing positive change as a result of them is very tricky, because a lot of them are programs that are intended to basically grease the wheels of the usual research process. Now, they're trying to make sure people are engaging more with data management plans, but managing their own data better and more efficiently. And that kind of improvement of the effectiveness and efficiency of how researchers are working is really hard to capture, especially in the short term, and especially because a lot of the target audience are PhDs and postdocs who often are leaving the institution where they received the training from these systems and strategies relatively soon after they've had the training, within a year or two in many cases, and that makes it very difficult. I will say that I think there's some good evidence across the various data champion community support systems that this is a much more efficient way of reaching the various members of the research community than the sort of central body sort of projecting out with just their staff members about issues about research data. And one of my personal favorites of the other case studies is the sort of seniors data outreach. I forget what the exact title is now, but essentially a initiative to try and reach out to those researchers coming to the ends of their careers who often have vast data sets collected over many years, often because they're in a previous generation of research norms, not as well managed and sort of structured or shareable or any of the other fair aspects as ones of junior researchers, and data that's thus in danger of being lost relatively quickly when that senior researcher retires. And I think that's the kind of initiative that's got the right idea about a targeted sort of smaller scale initiative, because that's looking at data that's really at risk and being currently managed by people who are probably in the most need of support and can have a real tangible benefit in getting that material into a form where it can still be used after that researcher retires. But again, finding evidence that that's working is difficult because you're restricted to the context of that institution. And yes, maybe you can say that, oh yeah, we've successfully managed to get these data sets out of these people. And you can infer that maybe that wouldn't have happened if this initiative hadn't have happened, but it's hard to be 100% sure. I don't know, Connie or Roman, do you have any other thoughts along the same lines?
Yeah, I like to add a little bit more or less what you said in a different way. So for me, is the whole research data management a journey we have just started, and we know that's a long way we have to go. And engaging with the researcher is a very important step. And this cookbook shows in a way of sharing the knowledge and sharing the experience from other institutions. So this is a kind of orientation for other institutions. And what worked in one institution doesn't mean that it worked in another institution, but it's something what you can see how other people can approach to this topic, and what the experience they made so far. And so that's also good to have some follow-ups that you can also see the process which happens in different institutions, and maybe some of these use cases turned out in the long run not to have the best way. Maybe some turns out that's the right way, but we still don't know it at the moment.
Okay, thanks very much. There's been a follow-up question about, is there a study or discussion paper about senior researchers and research data management? Maybe we'll take that on notice, and if James, Raman or Connie have any about that, we could potentially add them to the webinar page where we'll put the recordings and the slides.
Yep, that seems.
Sorry, Connie, I actually accidentally mute. Hang on. Sorry, I'm trying to unmute Connie, but I can't. I don't know why.
That's fine. I'm in now. Sorry about that. I think somebody muted me. Somebody muted me and I couldn't unmute. And I wanted to actually interject for the earlier question, but it's probably going to run out.
I'm sorry, Connie, that was me.
No, it's okay. The only comment I had, and obviously just from my quite just short-lived experience, should I say, of working with the data champions, and it relates to what James was saying earlier about measuring impact. It's quite hard to measure the success of a particular case study or a strategy. But I do think, following on as well from Roman's comment with engagement, I do think it's all about reaching out to researchers and finding out what they need and how we can meet the needs, or how somebody with discipline-specific knowledge can meet those needs too. So I think that's how we can start to measure impact. Because I started to interview data champions, and I was trying to write articles to, as I mentioned, reward or recognise what they were doing. They were going on a blog, and people were starting to read about data management then within the university and hear more. So I think it's about raising awareness. And as Roman said, we're at the start of a long journey. It's not something that maybe PhD students or even some postdocs are considering. So I think it's a case of reaching out and talking more about it, and especially things like this webinar, sharing the RDA outputs more broadly, and encouraging people to sort of look to join these kinds of organisations, or at least learn about them.
Thanks. Okay, so there's a couple of requests for specific information, like the link to Connie's article about the book sprint. So we'll collect those and put them on the webinar page. There's one final question here. Did your project include higher education institutions that have data management requirements for PhD students? Does the cookbook provide guidances for different types of researchers, for example, graduate postdoc faculty?
So to answer that second question, part of that question, the cookbook's really focused on the sort of institutional level. So rather than it's not sort of doesn't provide advice for research data management specifically for postdocs or PhD students or senior researchers. It's really about how institutions engage with those people. That said, yes, there are examples of both including research data management as explicit parts of PhD training, and other ones that specifically target certain cohorts of researchers. So like the senior researchers coming up to retirement example that I mentioned before, and certain other examples which are more focused on postgraduate students, of engaging them with data management at early stages of their careers. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, thanks very much. And we've gone a little bit over time. Apologies for that. But I would like to thank all the participants for joining us, and of course thank the speakers, 2 of whom will hopefully now get a bit of sleep, given it's the middle of the night for them. So thank you very much. And again, it was great to have you talk, and we will put out the recording and slides hopefully early next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie, for organising. And yeah, as I said, anyone interested in more details of specific case studies, you can download the book for free. It's there on the link in the slides, or you can just Google it and you will find it immediately. And all the extra contextual information you need on the specific case studies is included within there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I'll close the webinar now. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.